Welcome to the Inside Track, a groundbreaking webinar series hosted by Carine Schneider, founding partner of Compass Equity Strategic Advisors. Join us as we delve into the journeys of exceptional founders and CEOs who are shaping the future of their industries. From sharing their professional stories to uncovering invaluable lessons learned, each episode promises to inspire and empower. We are so happy you've joined the conversation.
Well, welcome everybody to our inaugural version of the Inside Track, our new webinar series that's aimed at founders and people in the private company space worldwide who are trying to build the next great company. And I'm really excited today to have two colleagues of mine who I've known for quite a while, Andy Quayle and Tony Waller from CMS. CMS is one of the world's largest law firms. And what I love about CMS is they have a wonderful program called Equip, which they're going to tell you about in a moment. Today we're going to talk. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the legal issues and some of the advice that Tony and Andy can give you, having worked with probably hundreds and hundreds of startups at this point. I think they've kind of seen the successes and the failures and the challenges that founders and new companies face. So we're going to jump right into some of these topics, but first let me have them introduce themselves. So Andy, do you mind giving us a quick overview of your background?
Yeah, thanks, Carine. I'm Andy Quayle. I head up the employee incentives team at CMS. I help companies to design and implement equity plans for their employees, principally working for privately owned companies based in the UK. I also help companies wherever they're based to operate their equity plans in other countries throughout the world. And sort of linked to that is I'm also a director of Share Reporter. And Share Reporter is a joint venture that CMS has set up to help companies understand their legal and tax compliance obligations when operating equity plans globally. And it's underpinned by a database that CMS has sort of curated, and it currently covers nearly 100 countries around the world.
Terrific. And Tony, you want to give us a little background on yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Tony Waller. I'm a partner in CMS in London. I'm what we call a corporate partner. So I help and have been helping for the last 35 years now, amazingly. 25 years helping owner-managed businesses build to scale and then ultimately exit. I primarily operate in the tech sector. Very used to supporting entrepreneurs as they build and scale fascinating businesses. And a real privilege to do that with them. One of the things you kindly mentioned, our Equip program, that's my baby. I founded it about 7 years ago now. And that's our curated program where we look after early stage startups. We take them on pre-seed. It's a curated program where we pick and choose the businesses that we think we can make the most difference to. CMS is a big international organization, as you say. We're in nearly 50 countries worldwide. We're running this program in 30 different jurisdictions, and we're helping hundreds of companies across the planet as they build and scale, offering them a wide range of support, not just legal support, but a range of different resources that we offer in secure for the startups of the program, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. It's been a great journey.
Well, you kindly invited Paul and myself to one of your dinners, and it hasn't left me yet. I think we met with 30 of your CEOs and founders, and so impressive what they're all doing, and so different. So I'm sure you've got some interesting perspectives and stories to share. Well, let's talk a little bit about startups, and we're going to try and be global and generic here. There's obviously differences between what happens in London and what happens in Singapore and what happens in Silicon Valley, but generally we're going to try and share some information. So maybe starting with you, Tony, what's one or two things that you just see most startups kind of do wrong? I'll add mine after you're done with the two of you, but what do you just kind of see that you're like, oh, here we go again. This is the wrong thing to do.
I think, I mean, there's lots of different things that, being an entrepreneur is a lesson in learning how to get things wrong, right? It's a constant iteration of messing things up, finding the right way to do it, and then building again from there. But I think, for me, one of the things I see startup founders do more often than not is these are bright, driven people who often have backgrounds in different industries. Perhaps they have a background in larger scale organizations, maybe with more very sophisticated investors. And what that means is sometimes founders have a tendency to overcomplicate things from the beginning. So they look to sort of build very complicated structures. They try and think of every iteration of how things might go wrong, or how they might want to get things right. And actually, I think the best advice for a founder, and it's sort of combined with the second thing that they often get wrong, is keep it simple. Yeah, absolutely. Always try and boil it down to the simplest approach you possibly can. Even if that's not perfect for you, ultimately simple is your friend when you're building an early stage business. And the second thing I think I would say that people get wrong way more often than you can count is a lack of focus. So I think it's incredibly tempting when you're a founder, and this is really true for lots of the businesses we work with in software, for example, in particular, where you build software, you think it has a particular purpose in mind, you're trying to sell it into organization, there's a real temptation to say, oh, well, maybe we could tweak it like this, maybe we could tweak it like that, as customers say, well, I wish it did this, I wish it did that. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you sell into this different vertical or that different vertical? Try and ignore the noise, try and ignore everyone's very helpful recommendations about what you should do. Focus on the core. Focus, keep it simple, keep to a very specific vertical, I would suggest, and make sure you are true to your mission as best you can. And that might mean turning away opportunities to make revenue. It might mean turning away opportunities to make some sort of short-term income. It's very tempting to sort of take some consulting advice alongside selling in the software sometimes. Right, but actually, distraction from your core purpose. What you're trying to do.
What about you, Andy? Maybe more from the incentive and pay side, but what do you generally see them do wrong?
Again, I guess there's probably two sort of common errors that we see. One is probably being over generous, particularly in the early stage, and almost giving away too much of the equity to the original employees, and then realizing as you're scaling the business and you're taking on investors and you, as a founder, you're being diluted, to then realizing you're running out of road in your stock option pool, and having to have quite difficult conversations with the investors as to how you're going to create more equity pool to incentivize employees, and very often that leads to pain for the founder, who ends up being sort of overly diluted by anything that's kind of put in place. The second thing that we see, particularly as companies that are beginning to scale and they're engaging employees in different countries, is just mistakes being made from a sort of a legal and tax compliance perspective. And once a founder has got their head around how their equity plan might work in their home country, there's often an assumption that it'll work the same way in every other country where they roll it out, and invariably that's not the case. And we spend a lot of our time as lawyers on exit situations trying to tidy up sort of tax and legal mistakes that have been made with equity plans. And so, I think trying to get advice, or at least understanding what the pitfalls are before rolling out an equity plan globally, I think is very important.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole conversation around equity, when I meet new founders, the first thing I always hear them say is, well, I'm going to give this person 2% and that person 5%. And, if you start to add it up during lunch, you're like, okay, so you're at 142% now. It doesn't work quite that way. I try really quickly to get entrepreneurs to think about an option pool, and that's kind of the amount of money in the bank that you can spend on your advisors and your employees. I'm curious, how often are you seeing founders or investors not wanting to provide for an equity pool or a share plan pool? I mean, are you seeing that as common? Because I keep running into it where mostly outside the United States, they say, we're not going to provide the employees with any equity, which I just find amazing, but curious what you guys have experienced.
I think from my perspective, it's possible that the US is kind of the front runner here, and using equity to reward employees is just absolutely standard there. I suspect for Europe we're kind of playing catch up, but my experience over the last 15 years or so is that actually companies are more interested in using equity to reward employees. I think they are starting to see the benefit of doing that and sort of moving more towards the US model. I guess the difficulty, certainly across Europe, is that the legislation hasn't quite caught up to that yet. And so, certainly in a lot of countries, it's still quite challenging to give equity to employees without creating sort of security law issues or without creating sort of tax issues there. So I think there's a little way to go for the European legislation to catch up, but I think the appetite is there to use equity.
Good. Yeah, I always tell the story when one of my first startups was an Irish startup, and I was talking to one of the government ministers who was very excited about our startup, and he said, "We want to be just like Silicon Valley. What do we need to be? What do we need to do to be just like Silicon Valley?" And I said, "Well, you need to have employee equity, and the government has to support this with tax advantage plans." And he said, "No, not that. What else can we do to be just like Silicon Valley?" And I'm like, "Well, that is the secret sauce."
I think it's pretty common in UK startups in
the UK. Okay.
That it's the right approach.
Yeah.
So I do think Andy's right. It's sort of spreading around the world as the right approach, and it obviously has lots of advantages. And certainly, I would echo what Andy is saying in terms of common mistakes about giving equity away. I think that 142%. I often say to founders, try and put a notional amount of money on the table, and if you had to divide it up today, would it feel fair giving away that amount of money? Would it feel like a good investment on your part?
Yeah.
Would these people have helped you to secure your portion of the pie? And try and think of it that way.
Yeah. The other thing I hear investors say, and again, this is perhaps more US centric, is that you have too many people on your cap table. So when you're starting the company, the person who delivers your coffee gets some equity, and the landlord gets some equity. Like you very quickly, you feel like equity is the only thing that you have to pay with, the only currency, and so you start giving it away very quickly. And now you've got a cap table of 25 people on, and you haven't even raised your seed round yet. So curious what your thoughts are on that. Do you find at some point you just need to clean that up?
It's pretty common. We get to a point in life when it needs some control, shall we say, and it's not easy. I mean, if you leave it, the longer you leave it, the harder it gets to clean up. So it's definitely, you want to avoid having lots and lots of shareholders in the cap table if you can possibly help it. From my perspective, when we get to exit, as Andy says, one of the things that causes problems if you have a very long tail of shareholders and you're trying to secure all of them essentially to agree to a sale or an exit, that can get very challenging. So if you're incentivizing people through an option scheme, for example, it's much simpler to manage when you get to an exit, rather than having them directly sitting on the cap table. So generally, we try and avoid people allowing too many people to come onto the cap table itself. And if they are being given incentives through equity, that they're doing so in a way that there's a continued control or ability to control what they may do with that equity.
Right.
And I think part of the issue that we sort of see happening is that when you're sort of at the very early stage of the company and you're taking on your first employees, those employees probably are critical to the business, critical to getting the business off the ground. And it is appropriate to give them equity, and quite often it's appropriate to give them generous equity awards. The difficulty is as the company grows and you take on more employees, not all of those employees are of the same grade and same level of importance. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't give them equity, but it should be a very different approach to giving them equity, and there should be it's a different thought process as to how much equity they get, what form of equity. Is it real shares or is it some kind of phantom stock that you should be giving them? And I think there's an inflection point where when you start employing people that are critical to the business, you should really think about your strategy when it comes to equity.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to another question, Andy, which is around cash comp. So again, when you're starting out the company, you're generally bootstrapping, you don't take a salary as founders. Let's say there's 3 founders in a company, and then you bring in a little bit of investment money and you say, well, we'll continue not to pay ourselves much because we're taking equity in the business. But what's your thought about what investors feel, either one of you, they put in a couple of $1 million, pounds, whatever, into this company. And now the CEO says, great, I want a salary of £250,000 because that's what CEOs in my sector are earning. What's your thought about the cash side of pay?
I mean, I think certainly from an investor's point of view, they're generally not putting £2 million into the business so that the CEO can start paying himself a generous salary. They're putting it in there for the growth of the business. But equally, I think we see the opposite, which is founders almost kind of assume they just can't pay themselves and that they should carry on not drawing a salary. And I don't think that's right either. So I think there is a sort of a happy median. And I think, it's not uncommon to see sort of once fundraisings come in for founders to start paying themselves 150,000 UK pounds, each year. That's not uncommon, but I think you're starting to pay yourself higher salaries becomes a challenge. But then what you also see is, depending on the nature of your business, you may have some employees who demand high salaries, and then it becomes, I think, quite a difficult situation where you may have the CEO on a lower salary than some of his own staff.
Right. Let's say there's
something I'd encourage founders to talk about at term sheet stage. When you're talking to an investor, you should have an honest conversation with them about it. As Andy says, it's not really in an investor's interest to say thou shalt not pay yourself. That's not going to work. It's not going to help you live and carry on doing a great job for the business. Right. So there's got to be a grown-up conversation.
Yeah.
Have it at the same time you're having a conversation about what's the money for.
I think that's really great advice, because I do think, and when I look at companies where I'm considering investing in, I don't want this person to have to work at Starbucks, on the weekends or something. I need to, everybody's got bills to pay, and I want to make sure that they're focused on the business and not spending all the time worried about their personal life. So yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice. So let's talk about the dynamic between founders. Sometimes you have 2, 3, 4 founders. It may not be just a single individual. What advice would you give if you're part of that dynamic where there's 2 or 3 of you starting the company? What's the first thing you tell them to do as they're getting the company off the ground?
Well, I think what I would say is I get a lot of founders saying, "Oh, we've known each other since college. This is all fine. We're all great friends, and this is going to be no problem. We don't need an agreement." I strongly encourage them to reconsider that discussion, because life happens, and whether you're best friends or not, and particularly if you're, in a way, if you're best friends, it's best to have had a sensible conversation with each other and agreed what happens if something changes for one of us. And it doesn't. There's a lot of stories out there about founders falling out. We've all seen movies about it and read stories about it, and it's definitely true. I mean, lots and lots of startups fail because founders have fallen out, but many more actually fail because life changes, and not everyone can live on bread and water, as many entrepreneurs often find themselves doing in the early stages, and people find that they have families, they have bills to pay, as you say, and they need to get back to quote a normal job, and so they need to move away. But what you can't have is that those founders who are left behind, who are going to carry on with the business, find that they are working and sweating away at growing the business for only half the value of the business that they're growing. The founder who's left retains 50% of the shares, and that's that problem comes up way more than you might think. Mm-hmm. So having some sort of agreement up front where you're clear with each other to say, look, we're all going to do this for the next 4 or 5 years together, and if we don't, this is what will happen in relation to our shares. We're all happy that we'll give up this portion of our shares if we only do a portion of that time. That's a very sensible, normal conversation. And if you have it up front, when people don't have dollar signs in front of them, then that's the best time to have it. So don't try and kick that can down the road. It becomes harder and harder and harder to have that discussion as time goes on. It's something you should spend time on. And there are plenty of sensible, not expensive, relatively template agreements out there that someone can help you with. But get a lawyer to look at it for all of your benefit and have them say this is a sensible way to proceed, because it'll just pay dividends. in the future for those who stay behind.
Yeah, and it's not just about a falling out. As you said, life happens. One of the partners can die. One of the partners could divorce. As you said, someone has to go back to work. I tell a story of two women I know who started a company, and it was going to be 50-50, and one of them had to go get a job and didn't quite agree where things were going, and the other one said, fine, then I have 100% of the stock now. And they had never really talked about what they got, and they didn't want to have a falling out because they were friends, and so the person walked away with nothing for the year or two that they had stuck into the company. And yeah, it's just one of those things of, it's like a prenup. You just need to do it. Right. So, and I agree, get a good lawyer to help you work through it. Just, if nothing else, as an independent arbiter to help you understand.
Right. That's not self-serving. That is just, you all want to be able to look someone in the eye and say, is this fair?
Yeah.
I think a professional will do that for you. Very sensible.
And I think another issue we often see actually isn't just about the kind of the falling out situations, but it's also about how much equity each founder gets. And very often, if you've got 4 founders, they just naturally divide the equity 25% each. But often that isn't the right thing to do. There are different levels of contributions being made, and often these things get picked up when you come around to doing the Series A. And a lot of the work that we do is sort of reshuffling this sort of the founder pack and sort of trying to redistribute the equity, but that's very difficult to do when there is value in the company, because there would be a lot of tax issues trying to sort of sort that out, be moving value around. So I think also part of the conversation is, being honest about different levels of contribution and how the equity should look in relation to that. And we also see the exact opposite, where particularly where you have one founder who starts the company and then sort of has co-founders joining them, is often that original founder holds 100% of the equity, and they just don't get round to sorting out the equity. Promises are made, but it's never documented. And again, it's very, very difficult to sort those things out on a sort of a Series A fundraise.
Yeah.
I would definitely say if you've got a difficult conversation to have it sooner rather than later, because it only gets harder. Particularly as you approach sort of milestone events for the business, because you start imputing value into the business, and therefore as soon as you start moving shares around, you're moving value around, and the tax man rears his ugly head, and it becomes very difficult to get past it. So grab the nettle early, and get on with the conversation, have that honest conversation as soon as you can.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Andy, you would add, if those people are in another country, then the company might be, or the other founders might be, you've got even more complexity. So don't wait.
Yeah, there is never any advantage to waiting. It's always easier to deal with these things, earlier on in the process. Yeah.
And this is, I think, the struggle I always have when I'm dealing with founders, is they really don't want to spend any money. And I struggle myself in terms of what kind of advice to give them, because and I don't want to be sexist here, but I see it more with women founders than men founders, where they just won't spend any money unless it's 100% on their product or whatever. So they won't get themselves a good advice. They won't hire an attorney. They won't hire a tax advisor. They won't hire someone to help open doors for them. Whatever it is, they're just too afraid to spend the money. And I get it, it's generally their money. But what's your thoughts on that in terms of making those commitments early versus waiting down the road? I know you said bad problems don't get better, but what's your thought on that?
I think look, there are lots of us out there in terms of the legal support who are prepared to do things on a discounted basis. So one of the advantages of joining our program is a heavy discount on time. We're looking to invest in businesses that we see long-term growth with as a client of the firm. And again, that's not wishing to be self-serving. It's I think the other side to it, I would say, is getting things wrong on your cap table, getting things wrong in the way in which you issue options, is unfortunately likely to cost you a significant amount more than the upfront fee will do, as and when you get to an exit, and by a huge multiple. So Andy and I have just completed a deal where we've seen the founder get things wrong, and it's cost him hundreds of thousands. This isn't just small change. This is real serious money, and that's gone out the door because they tried to cut a corner. and
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's come back to bite them.
Yeah.
So it is a tough message, and I appreciate it's very hard, but I think you need, and I also think you need to take some advice about where to spend the money. So a good lawyer should be able to sit with you and say, okay, this is worth spending money on, and this is where this is where you can probably get the can down the road a bit.
Right.
Take a approach.
Yeah.
Something you just can't take a risk-based approach to.
Yeah.
Those and I think it comes back to how do you retain value in your business. For yourself as a founder, but also for all the other shareholders, that's got to be a key focus. And I always say, an organised, well-advised company is a valuable company. So be mindful of that. And we've talked, sort of on the cap table front. There are things. Being chaotic about your cap table is going to leave you with all sorts of problems for the future. Not just on exit, but actually as you go. Investors are looking for clarity, for certainty when they come in about what their dollars are going to get them when they invest. If they can't see a clear picture of what the dollar is going to get them because there's uncertainty around what's being given away where and on what basis, you're going to run into trouble very quickly, and that's going to put a real brake on the business being able to grow and develop. So, go out there, use the tools that are available to you. Running a cap table is not always straightforward. There are great cap table management tools out there that can support you as you're growing and developing the business. Use those tools. Use the advisors who are used to using those tools. It will absolutely pay dividends in the future.
Yeah. I know if I had $1 for every time someone said to me, well, we'll do that after we finish our Series A or our seed round or whatever, I mean, I wouldn't have to work. And I can't tell you how often they're wrong, because when they bring in the investor, they are now no longer in charge. So any of the things that they could have simply done before they started the fundraise or before they closed the round is now much more complicated and sometimes, or many times, out of their control. And I try to explain this to people, like, don't wait until the round is done. Get your cap, like you said, get your cap table clean before you go out and start fundraising. Get everything done, settled with who owns what, or whether you're going to use preferred shares, or all these things that you think you'll do, because otherwise the investor will dictate the terms and will dictate the solution. Let's talk a little bit about fundraising. Not that that's the whole topic for today, but in terms of going out and raising funds. Couple of things maybe that you guys have seen that you think people do well when they're going. Obviously, we've talked about having a clean cap table and having an organized house, but other things maybe in terms of board of directors, advisors, IP protection. Are there some other things that you would recommend people do to look good when they're going out and raising funds?
Well, a slightly broader point. It sort of stays with the organizational point, but I think it's a useful tool. So what I often say to founders is, talk to a lawyer who does this and ask them for their template due diligence questionnaire, right? So every investor, when they come and invest in a business, they will likely carry out some due diligence on the company. They'll ask their lawyer to ask some basic questions about the company, a range of different questions across a broad range of topics. It'll be about cap table, but it'll also be about employees. It'll be about, is there any litigation in the business? It'll be about what sort of assets does the company own. Have sort of a basic assessment of what there is in the business. Go and get one of those due diligence questionnaires. A lawyer will give it to you for free. That questionnaire. They're very standard, and use it as your filing cabinet. Right? Use those topics as your filing cabinet, and as you go, as you enter into employment agreements, set up a Dropbox or whatever it may be. Use and set up the index as if you were answering those questions. And put in documents as you go. It'll save you huge amounts of time and will look clean and impressive and professional to any investor that's coming in. An organized company is a valuable company. Absolutely. Strongly assert that. And that's just a simple trick.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is get on top of the jargon, because this suddenly becomes a very jargon-intensive discussion. With investors, and there's some basic jargon that you can get your head around pretty quickly, but you want to know it, right? If you don't know it, you are going to get tripped up by a discussion with an investor. Not really the investor's fault, because this is their business and this is what they do, but it's kind of your fault if you don't know the world you're entering into. So know the arena that you're going into, understand what's meant by a liquidation preference, what on earth is anti-dilution, and so on. There's a whole sort of there's a whole load of jargon involved in this process. If you're on top of that and you understand it, and there are lots of dictionaries out there that you can use, founders dictionaries and so forth, they'll give you a good grounding in this. And there's obviously masses and masses of information about this all over the internet. Go and learn for a little bit about the industry, because it'll just make you a much better investor in your company. If the investor can have a sensible conversation with you up front without having to teach you about the terms of offering.
Yeah, I also find, and I try to explain this to people raising money, you have to look organized. So like you said, having the answers to everything, understanding the jargon, but I don't know, Andy, how often you run into this, where one of the things they're going to want to look and see, if you say you've signed a contract with somebody, they're going to want to see a contract. If you say you have options and employees, they're going to want to see those agreements. And if you don't have those things done, they're going to want them done. And one of the reasons I think people don't understand why, well, obviously due diligence, and they want to protect their investment, but also at exit. You don't want to be sitting there, you finally got a great offer on the table, and now you realize that you don't have contracts signed or employee agreements signed or whatever it is. They don't want the exit to be in any way jeopardized by the fact that your house isn't in order.
And I would say generally with that, one of the key things to do, so ultimately an investor is going to get to know everything about your company, like it or not, right? So be transparent. If there's a skeleton that you're worrying about in the closet, be upfront about it. Tackle it straight up front. That's the professional thing to do, right? Don't let an investor come across it and get spooked by it. Address it in the way you want it addressed, and make sure it's clear. But I would also say know the answers. So it's okay if you haven't done everything. No one's expecting you to have done absolutely everything you could possibly do in relation to the business. If you've made a decision not to protect certain aspects of your IP because of X, Y, Z, you've taken some advice and been told actually it's not necessary at this point, or actually it's not going to help. It's much better to be able to say to an investor when they say, why haven't have you done this, rather than saying, I hadn't thought about that. Much better to be able to say, no, I haven't done it because that's fine. We're investors for such a be on top of it, be clear about what an investor's going to ask you. That due diligence questionnaire will give you a very big head start on that.
And I think from a sort of an equity perspective, one of the sort of the worst things you can say to an investor is, oh, here are the options I've promised to employees, but I haven't yet delivered, because that is a big red flag. And as we've touched upon already, the investors are very concerned about the cap table. So, one of the first things you should address is, if you've got promised options, get them papered before you get to your investment round.
Yeah. I have seen a seed round lead investor pull out because the options were not papered. And he just said, look, if they didn't do that, I wonder what else they haven't done. Like, it was kind of the canary in the coal mine for him. And he said, and I remember having a chat with him, he said, there's so many investment opportunities for me. I get to pick the cleanest, most perfect opportunity because there are so many. And I think people sometimes, you don't want anybody to call your baby ugly, but it's not that your company is ugly, it's that your housekeeping is ugly. And that can cause someone to go, look, it looks like a great idea, but I've got 10 other great ideas that I'm reviewing this week. And so, for these reasons, I'm not in. And people don't understand that it's not 100% looking at what the company does. It's also all the other things around it that sometimes make investors walk away from a deal. Well, we're getting to the end here, but let me ask you one more kind of more difficult question, which is, what do you tell companies who are running out of money? That it happens, you're trying to make payroll, you just make it, you get another investor in. What's your advice when you're kind of living on that payroll to payroll situation?
Just from a sort of straight legal perspective, I think one of the things that the founders need to do is to stop and make sure they're clear that they have a number of hats here, right? They have two particular hats. One is, what do they do about themselves? But also, what do they do as directors of the business? That's a different thing to being a founder, right? So if you're a director of a business, certain duties, responsibilities to everybody else involved in the business, whether it's your shareholders, your creditors, wherever else it may be. So go and get some advice around duties and responsibilities at that point of what you are required to do, because you can very, very quickly get tripped up with other shareholders in the business who are pointing fingers at you and saying you're only looking after yourself here, you're not looking after the company like you should. And that's so that's a sort of, a little bit grim, but I think it's an important thing that you have to step back and think, okay, what role am I playing here? The second thing is, in terms of getting out and getting money, I think it's the most obvious. It's very obvious, but I think you should start close to home. You need to go and talk to the people maybe who have already invested in you, obviously friends and family if that's helpful, but I think more likely you're talking to the investors who have already come into your cap table. They've already placed a bet. They've already decided to back you. Ask them on what basis they can help you, bridge the issue you already have. Second thing is to think more broadly about what cash is available out there. There's a lot of grant funding available, and that's not always well tapped into. So you can go and talk to specialist advisors who can help find grant funding available to you as a business. So that's great if you can secure it. There's a time issue there. I mean, generally, I would say, if you're a business strapped for cash, you can anticipate being strapped for cash. Timing is everything, right? So it takes a long time to raise money from everyone. So do not leave it until you've got a last cent in the bank. You're going to be, that's too late, way too late. You need this well in advance. Fundraising is unfortunately an eternal activity for founders in the business. Once you start, you don't stop. You have to keep going. It generally has to be someone's job to do it. So look close to home. Look for the sort of low-hanging fruit. And I think that goes beyond just investors. You can think about talking to your clients. Right? So if you've got clients or customers who started paying, you have sort of regular payments to you, they're going to be relying on you as a business. Sometimes customers can be an interesting source of cash to get you over a short-term issue. So do think about that. Maybe go and talk to relying on you.
Nice. Well, let me ask you each one final question. What one nugget of wisdom would you impart with our listeners today about helping them with their new company, whether they're brand new or they've been at it for a couple of years? What would be the one thing that you would each tell them, aside from all the things you said today?
I think from my point of view is I would strongly recommend that you get some cap table software. There's lots of providers out there. Some of them will provide you for free at the early stages of your company and then only start charging you as your company grows. I think just having that cap table software gives you discipline. It stops you having things like promised stock options, and you become sort of much better at staying on top of what I think is one of the most important aspects of the company, certainly from an investor's perspective.
Mm-hmm. And Andy, I'd say I'm out with that because, obviously I love cap table software. Is there's nothing that drives an investor crazy more than them writing you a check and then never seeing anything, not being able to log in and see what they own, or the fact that, they're an investor in this company. And the cap table software is good for you as a founder, but I think it's also good for your investors to know, okay, because in a year or two, they may forget exactly how much money they put into your company or how many shares they own, but at some point they're going to want to know, and you want them to be able to log in and see the agreement they signed and have everything organized. So I think it goes both ways. Good advice. What about you, Tony?
I think one of the most common issues I think that founders often have is it's a really lonely game. It's a really lonely business being a founder. So try and find people who can help you around you, whether mentors, advisors on your board, professional advisors. Find mentors, find people you can spark off, you can share your problems with and learn from, and join communities of other founders, because the best way to learn is to learn from people who've been there, who've done it, who've got all the scars. Go and learn from them. Go and use their knowledge, use their experience. Don't try and do it alone. It's far too lonely again to be doing on your own. Go out, find some help.
Someone told me when I started my first company, get a dog. Like, because you're going to need it, because your partner, your personal partner, they're going to get tired of hearing about all of this, and you can't talk to your employees and you can't talk to your board. So yeah, you need somebody to be there. And I think there are a lot of great groups out there now that are kind of peer groups that are good. Well, I want to thank both Tony and Andy for sharing some time and wisdom with us. Obviously, we're talking about many years of experience that you've been able to share with us. I just want to remind people we're doing our next Inside Track on March 12th. We're going to have Tom Kobe. Tom is the CEO of a company called Ping Pilot, so we're going to hear the other side of the ledger from the founder themselves and all of the challenges that they're going through. And I just want to say I'm Carine Schneider, and I'm a founding partner of Compass Equity Strategic Advisors. We work with all kinds of companies, whether they're private or public, around the world, and helping them grow. And so that's what the Inside Track is all about, is to share some of the wisdom of the people we run across who can hopefully help you grow your company. So thanks again, Andy and Tony. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And if we can help in any way, either Andy, Tony, or Compass, we will have a slide available on YouTube when we post the video, or you can write to us at info@compass-equity.com, and we'll make sure you get in touch with Andy or Tony if you need. And if anybody wants information about the EQUIP program, please go to the CMS website, and I'm sure you'll find more information there. And it's a program I highly encourage you to think about seeing if you qualify for and can get involved with, because I think, to Tony's last point, I think you'll meet a lot of good people there that can help you. So thanks again, you guys, and we'll see you soon.